Before I get into the video, you should know and firmly believe that I am not one of those people who only picked up Hollow Knight and decided to make a video about it because of the current hype.
You serious?
Okay, the truth. I wanted to play Hollow Knight for quite a while. I was even interested in the news about Silksong's release. Also, in my defense, I did pick it up last year, but Shadow of the Erdtree was released and everything was put on pause, and I kinda forgot about it. Until August of this year, the number of Hollow Knight players spiked when Silksong's release date was official. Aside from returning players, a lot of gamers wanted to catch up in order to try out the most hyped up indie game of all time, and I was one of those people. In fact, I finished Hollow Knight after the release of Silksong rather than before. Once I did, I realized something really important. You don't play Hollow Knight to catch up to a sequel, you play Hollow Knight to enjoy Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is more than just the predecessor to something great. It is something great. During the week in which I finished my very recent first playthrough, concluded with the true ending, I realized that Hollow Knight is more than just an indie game made by 3 people. 4 if you count the composer. It may have been that way during the first month of its release, but through the sheer force of low pricing, beautiful art style, recommendations, and amazing free story DLCs, Hollow Knight has turned into a cultural icon within the community. Gaming before Hollow Knight and after is definitely not the same. A sort of metamorphosis, if you will. Well, it is a game about bugs, so get it? Bugs? Metamorphosis? Anyways, from lore nerds to video game designers to speedrunners to artists and so on, Hollow Knight built its own loyal fanbase. A game that was supposed to be finished within the span of 20 hours. Yet if you're part of Hollow Knight's community, you know that the average fan doesn't go under 30.
Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
It took me 37 hours to finish the game on the Radiant's ending with some side exploration too, and I feel like I've missed out on a lot of things because, quote unquote, I wanted to catch up to Silksong. And when I went to do my usual retrospective on YouTube after the credits, I realized that I actually did miss out on a lot of amazing content. But now I know that I don't need to catch up to anything. Even though at the time I'm writing the script, I did try playing Silksong for an hour or so and I'm already fallen in love with it. I should just enjoy Hollow Knight, mainly for reasons I'm going to outline in this video. Speaking of which, this is the first part of a longer video, with the second being exclusively on Silksong. So I'd understand if you think you've already seen enough of Hollow Knight after 8 years. Especially after the release of its Game of the Year contender of a sequel. But if you feel like you can spare a few more minutes listening to the impressions of a new fan in the making, then welcome to my video on how Hollow Knight managed to establish a conversation with me. A conversation that should never be rushed. We usually associate conversation with language. Linguists would call it discourse instead. What makes a language what it is its components, those being syntax, semiotics, packaging sequence, situated meanings determined by context, so on and so forth. And when you think about it, games have these components as well. They're governed by rules you need to abide by. They include a complex system of signs. They need to be played through a specific order. We often call it progress. And those games have certain contexts in which their themes would make sense. So in a way, all games establish some kind of conversation with us. And understanding that conversation is actually the only way you can win and possibly enjoy the game. And whether or not you like the game highly depends if you had an interesting conversation with it. Now, the conversation between the player and Hollow Knight definitely doesn't play by the rules. I'll explain that in details, but before, let's talk about the central figure of the game. This little guy right here. The way we are introduced to the knight is actually quite curious. We have no background on who they are, and the fact that we did not get to choose a name for them or customize their character proves that they are an established entity within the game, not just an avatar or an extension of our presence, but you would only confirm the truth about them during the endgame, specifically if you venture on extra exploring to unlock the true ending. Their simple design reflects a blank state, as if they were just born. They have a humanoid shape yet with no distinctive qualities. Their head is just a shell, and they have holes for eyes that show nothing but darkness. And they are only equipped with an old nail to fend off foes, with no extra powers or a voice of their own. However, the knight's size was definitely intentional, as it would help with the platforming, and it would give off a sense of scale when facing off against enemies and bosses. I have always found it fascinating that the knight can walk up to a boss and be like,
Police steady watching me, every day they clocking
This can help associate them with qualities such as bravery and determination, but such associations are actually reflections of yourself, as the major quality about the knight is the fact that they were without will or emotion, and the only thing they have inside is just the void, as that is the requirement for a pure vessel. The knight is one of many vessels born of the Pale King and the White Lady's union, and they were supposed to be the vessel to seal the Radiant's infection if not for the king's affection towards the Hollow Knight, an affection which caused for the events of the game to happen. The knight was not the only one who escaped the abyss, and there was nothing special about them apart from the fact that you were behind the controller. Well, lore-wise, they were the ones who received the call from Hallownest to fend off the infection. The knight embodies the archetype of a nameless hero who starts from nothing, but as they later acquire more powers, charms, upgrades, and combat arts, they become stronger. Yet, the knight is emotionless. They would not be able to appreciate the emotion of becoming powerful in the first place. So in that case, who recognized their evolution? Well, we need to talk about ludonarrative dissonance. The term was first coined by game designer Clint Hawking. It means that the sum of the player's experiences while playing a game is the actual narrative rather than the game's intended story. And to answer the question of who recognized the knight's strength, well, you did, and Hornet did too, I guess. Not to say that the whole story of Hollow Knight is just in your head, because it definitely isn't, but the gist of your journey is how your skills will elevate it through unbreakable persistence against powerful foes and tireless exploration of an unforgiven world. And this would be confirmed by the message of congratulations that appears after the credits. This was all about overcoming a great challenge. For example, when you look back at the final fight, you would come to perceive it as a tough final boss that you managed to defeat. Not that the kingdom is saved from the Radiance, but rather you saved the kingdom from the Radiance. You see, even though the knight is an established character in the game, their state of emptiness and silence and even lack of gender helped players project themselves onto them, signifying the establishment of the first requirement for a good conversation, inclusion. And instead of witnessing the story of a ghost in a shell stuck in a world of bugs, you were the one experiencing the cruel, lonely, yet beautiful setting of Hallownest. The game's world literally took me by surprise. At first, Dirtmouth and the Forgotten Crossroads gave off a lonely atmosphere. I have seen many people online hating on the Forgotten Crossroads, but I personally liked it. If you think about it though, what would anybody know about the actual atmosphere of the game if they haven't explored beyond the Forgotten Crossroads? Earlier when talking about language analysis, I mentioned the term packaging sequence, meaning that for a piece of discourse to make sense, its elements need to be arranged in a certain order. So even for an open world game, you can sense that there is an element of order placed for you to help navigate the world as intended, with only a few games straying off this path. Hollow Knight destroys the packaging sequence and allows you to make one on your own. Let me explain. A lot of people were introduced to Deepness by falling from Crystal Peak through a hole, but you can also get into it by defeating the Mantis Lords or through Queen's Gardens. Also, getting to the Resting Grounds, which is an integral part of the main narrative, needs to happen either through the Crystal Peak or by taking the Tram Pass. I only had the Tram Pass just before the endgame because I was looking for dream bosses to fight for Essence, so this means I got it by accident while exploring Crystal Peak. And by this point of the game, you had better have the lantern, otherwise you'll be in big trouble. Even in terms of semiotics, the game uses minimal signs to tell you where to go or even what to do, especially after you get to the City of Tears, as things start getting complicated and less linear from there. You see, the fact that the game doesn't explicitly tell you what to do or where to go is the message in itself rather than the absence of it. The use of minimal support in exploration is a direct instruction to explore and get lost. That the metrics for winning the game is exploring rather than going where you should be going. Understand that this will hook you to Hollow Knight's conversation because you want to uncover more with every new area. How you do it is entirely up to you, which makes everybody's experience slightly different, and it also encourages the players to rearrange the order of areas explored now that they know where to find the necessary mechanics to progress. Speaking of those, let's talk about syntax. Hollow Knight, much like any other game, blocks you from certain things throughout the journey, things that can be unlocked once you have progressed long enough. Usually it happens once or twice that you can't access an early game area because of a late game mechanic, but whether we're talking about the Mantis Claw, The Crystal Heart or the Monarch Wings, all of those I have discovered by accident, because literally, what else is there to do if you're consistently being handicapped when trying to progress? The game's strategic use of limitation creates a large motive in directing your movement, and it would even force speedrunners to come up with unconventional methods like using the shade to jump or the Vengeful Spirit's push as a dash. It is truly amazing how the game consistently suppresses the player, and this only motivated them to figure out what the game was suppressing them from, because once all the abilities are discovered, the right charms are equipped, or all the platforming is mastered, the knight, or the player, becomes a literal force of nature. And what does Team Cherry do once that happens? Adding 4 free DLCs that are supposed to push the boundaries of the challenge even further, so that the players can keep actively returning to Hollow Knight, allowing it to live on further beyond its first year. Of course, not to mention how that inspired the modding community to create challenges of their own. It is like the developers figured out how to hook its community by upping the challenge with every single release. And, coming to think of it, who says that the developers are actually done with that? Okay, let's leave that for part 2, because for now, we need to talk about the last component for this conversation of bugs, nails, and shades. Your reward for exploring Hollow Nest isn't just exclusive to becoming stronger, but to enhancing your understanding of the context. If you explore beyond the Forgotten Crossroads, you will be faced with beautiful areas with detailed variation, distinguished through the new dangers they pose to your safety, and the newer enemies that reflect the past of a fallen kingdom. Speaking of those, once you have advanced through the game, you can check the Hunter's Journal, and you will realize that all of the enemies you have encountered so far used to have a complex ecosystem under the rule of the Pale King, connected by a sense of unity, belonging, class, honor, and unfortunately, greed. Some creatures aren't just stronger than others as per the game's sense of scale, but also more intelligent and organized, so they can all fit into some kind of hierarchy. Some of them have a sense of purpose while others act more like parasites, moving back and forth on a scale of a primitive state and a civilized one. Yet a huge portion of these creatures, whether civilized or not, with the exception of these chads right here, have been affected by the infection and therefore can never be who they once were, which explains why they emit an orange liquid when struck while others don't. The infection has persisted in turning the kingdom upside down, causing the death of honorable warriors, the betrayal of loyal kinsmen, and the eternal suffering of the innocent. Also, the masterful choice of soundtrack during the final battle against the Hollow Knight captures deep bleakness and distress, and it makes you feel nothing but regret for your actions and hate for the Pale King's choices. But overall, Hollow Knight created a shared sense of tragedy, and then blamed that tragedy onto a singular being with no other purpose than aggression towards the essence of what makes the Knight who they were, the Void. The final battle against the Radiants was a battle between two contrasting ideologies, and understanding that creates a whole different meaning to every blow you deal to the Moth Usurper, and makes plunging her in darkness much more satisfying. At the end of the day, it could be possible that Hollow Knight's effect on the fanbase, whether in terms of gameplay or lore, was not entirely intended by the developers. It could have been that they just had a bunch of cool ideas and mixed them in what would become one of the top indie games in history. But at some point, a game like Hollow Knight transcends its creators and becomes entirely independent of them, which would allow it to develop deeper connections with the player, as we've shown in this analysis. So now as Silksong becomes a fierce contender for Game of the Year, it begs the question of how different its conversation with the player is. By the time this video is released, a lot of you would have already finished the game, and you can tell that it differs mainly in terms of difficulty, but I guess we'll find out more in part 2. So thank you so much for sticking around until the end of the video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. How was your experience with Hollow Knight? Would you still revisit it after Silksong? Make sure to tell me about it in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.